Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 602 for the 26th of April 2020. Richard Saunders coming to you from Sydney, Australia, with my special guest co-host this week, all the way from Malmö in Sweden, the one and only Pontus Bergman. Hello, Pontus.
Hello, Richard. Good to be back.
It's almost like you're in the studio with me because, of course, we're looking at each other through the magic of
Right.
international video meetings, which everybody's doing these days.
Yes. Yeah, everybody's getting to use these tools now, yeah.
But it's working very well, I must say. It's working with almost no lag at all. Now, you're one of the co-hosts, of course, normally you're one of the co-hosts of the European Skeptics podcast. That's been going for 2, 3, 4, 5, how many years now?
4.5 years.
Okay.
So, yeah. So it's been a while, yeah.
I remember when you started.
Yeah. I don't. It's so much a part of my daily routine now to collect stories during the week and then check with Andras and Jelena, and sometimes we have other guest hosts, and just to prepare. So I'm constantly. I would probably still do that even if the show was cancelled. I would still by just habit collect all these stories.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I can tell you, I've done this show for coming up to 12 years, and now I can't imagine not doing it every week.
Yeah, that's right.
It's one of those things. I get to talk to all sorts of fabulous people like your good self. Now, of course, I love the European Skeptics podcast because you call yourself the ESP, the real ESP experience. That's a great name. That's a great name.
No, it was Andras' idea. We were brainstorming about cool names for the show, etc. And then he said, "Well, why not just the European Skeptics podcast?" That's boring. It sounds it's to the point, and the abbreviation is the ESP. And then, yeah, that's right. We'll do that.
That works pretty well. Now, tell me about your theme music, the song about going to Pluto. Where's that from?
Now, that was created by a lady called Keisha J. Gray on one of those TAM meetings a long time ago, together with George Robb. And it was called The Skeptic Song by James Randi. And it was perfect. So we contacted them both, George and Keisha, and said, can we use it for our show? Because it's perfect and it's not widely known. It's never been released anywhere. It was just a local recording done for that conference.
Right. Great. No, it's great. I love it. I like, as listeners of the Skeptic Zone will know, I like themes and theme tunes, because when you hear, for example, later on in the show, Mandy Lee Noble, for example, you hear her theme music, or Michelle Bickersmar has her theme music, and it puts them in that frame of mind. Oh, now I'm going to hear this person, or now I'm going to hear that. And whenever I listen to the ESP, of course, what do I hear first? I hear that music, and I know what's coming up. It's really good.
Right, yeah. And that's probably almost the only place you can hear it, because it's never been released, as I said.
Right. Now, before we talk about what's coming up on this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone, and it's a pretty packed episode this week, many people here in Australia, because of the news coverage, have had a very, I guess I'd have to say, negative opinion of what's happening in Sweden at the moment. Because here in Australia, there's social distancing, lots of things are shut. You can't go to the pub or a restaurant or a movie or anything like that. But I understand the situation in Sweden is very different. Maybe you can fill us in.
Yeah, it is different. And Sweden hasn't gone down into lockdown mode. There are strong recommendations of what to do and not to do, but compared to other countries, it's very, very few absolute rules, and it's been criticized very much now. You know, everybody's an expert on the internet, and everybody's wondering, what are we doing? Is it very irresponsible? Yada yada, and it is always difficult. And as a skeptic, we should all remember that things are always much more complicated than they seem. And Sweden is different in many respects, but mostly because healthcare and other things as well, but in this case, healthcare is not run by by politicians at all. It's very much run by appointed experts, not the government. So there are very strong rules in Sweden for what a minister can do in directing a local authority. So they have a lot of freedom, and hopefully they are driven by experts, the healthcare system. And as a skeptic, I support that. Let's keep the presidents and the prime ministers and these people out of healthcare advice. I just read this headline this morning from The Guardian, and it says, quote, "Trump hailed bleach cure after lobbying by quack medicine fraudster," end quote.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't want that.
We don't
right?
want that, no.
So because experts are in charge of the situation in Sweden, I think it leads to a different approach. It's much more long-term, I think, than in other places. If you compare with the other Scandinavian countries, they have gone much more into full lockdown mode. And so far, they have contained their spread much more than Sweden has. And certainly, they report fewer deaths from COVID-19. So that seems to indicate that they are doing something right and we are doing something wrong. But now, they're struggling under the burden of the lockdown, and they're preparing to relax the rules because their societies can't handle the lockdown, really. People are suffering from that. And I think what we know is that a vaccine is very far in the future. And the Swedish health authorities seem to have the approach that it's unavoidable that the pandemic will run its course. And the only way to handle it is to walk a very difficult balance. You can't avoid the disease, but you must manage it so that the hospitals are not above their capacity.
It's tough, isn't it? It's a real tightrope.
Yes. I don't know if the Swedish strategy is good. I'm not the expert. And maybe people are dying sooner than they had to, and that's really bad if so. On the other hand, I'm looking at Denmark now, and what will happen now there when they are forced to open up? And nobody there has been in contact with the virus. If we look at Stockholm, it's estimated that around 20% already have had the disease. And some experts say that if you reach 60%, you achieve herd immunity, and then the disease starts to fade out. Maybe we will get there. And then again, today I saw news stories that maybe you don't get immunity from having the disease, and then we're really doing the wrong thing. But anyway, the experts are in charge in Sweden, and I prefer that from the politicians. And if people hear that Sweden is not taking this seriously and that its policies are driven by incompetent people, I strongly disagree. They maybe it will turn out that they have the wrong strategy, but they are very competent and they're working very hard in a difficult situation where a lot of things are still unknown, of course.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we're all going to have to wait weeks or months to really get a good understanding about how this is going to impact different countries around the world with their different policies and whatever. I'm pleased to say the situation in Australia is looking very positive, and as they say, we are very much flattening the curve. Well, I can only say, Pontus, we wish Sweden all the best. I mean, we wish all the countries all the best in this ridiculous situation. But let's look at what's coming up on this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone and talking about coronavirus. Well, oddly enough, coronavirus gets a mention a couple of times in this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone. We're going to have an interview with Mick West, the author of a fabulous book called Escaping the Rabbit Hole. And he's a podcaster too. He does the Tales from the Rabbit Hole podcast. He's going to be talking to us about all sorts of conspiracy theories, which is his area of expertise. And we discuss a bizarre poster that's been appearing around Sydney about geoengineering and contrails and famine and all sorts of terrible things.
It's amazing how all these conspiracy theories suddenly combine into one big one when really this is happening. Yeah.
It really is. It's just crazy. And I got to feel sorry for the chemtrail conspiracy theory people at the moment, because there's hardly any chemtrails or contrails or anything like that.
No, because there's no airplanes. No.
That's right. Following that, it's the diet skeptic, Mandy Lee Noble. She's going to tell us or report to us about various wellness gurus trying to take advantage of the current situation, peddling all sorts of craziness. And the good news is, of course, that Pete Evans, the local wellness guru, has been fined by the government for peddling something called the biocharger, which is something like $15,000 box of lights and tricks.
Yeah, I've seen that machine on pictures online. It looks very impressive. Something a cross between a fax machine or a Dalek or something.
It's my impression exactly. It's like a fax machine and a Dalek. I love that. That's great. For those younger people listening to the show, a fax machine was something we used to use way back. And then following that, it's our regular segment with Michelle Bickersma, Logical Fallacies. This week, Michelle's going to be looking at appeal to nature. It's natural. It's wonderful. It must be good.
One of my favorite fallacies.
Absolutely, yeah. Then to round off the show, some news from the Centre for Inquiry with a newsletter they put out about homeopathy and why they think the government should take a stronger stand against people peddling homeopathy. Now, Pontus, you're going to join me at the end of the show. We've got some more things to discuss.
Yeah. Okay, Richard, but now I have to run upstairs because I'm recording in the basement, and I will have some Swedish pancakes with cloudberry jam.
Ooh, that sounds pretty good. Well, okay, while you do that, we're going to enjoy the Skeptic Zone. And joining me now on the line, all the way from beautiful Sacramento, California, it's the author and podcaster Mick West. Hello, Mick.
Hello, Richard.
Hello, good to talk with you. I'm half envious because, I spend a lot of time in California, but that's sort of come to a bit of a stop at the moment. Just for our listeners' sake around the world, what's the situation like with the pandemic where you are?
Well, where I am is actually in a fairly rural area, and I live in a county called El Dorado County, and they're actually petitioning the governor to open up the county again because they have so few cases here. I think we have something like 20 cases in the entire county. So I'm pretty lucky. I'm kind of like isolated in my house and just kind of doing the things I would normally be doing without going out too much. So not too bad, thankfully.
I guess that's a similar situation where I am in Sydney, Australia. It's not too bad. I mean, the bad part is, of course, the people, there are certain people who are suffering, and we've had some deaths in Australia, under 100 so far, I'm pleased to say. But the general society is suffering, of course, because of the unemployment and the restrictions.
Yeah, and that's something I think is going to take a while to really hit round here, because everything is just kind of, I think the momentum is carrying people forward, and they don't really realize the economic impact that's happening. I think it probably happens more to people in the cities, but around here it's kind of weird. Like things seem to be going along more or less as normal, just with a bit more social distancing. And we'll see what happens. I heard the price of oil dropped into negative territory today, so
yes,
it's going to be very interesting.
Yes, I heard that too. Maybe you'll turn up at the gas station and you'll fill up and they'll give you $20.
That's certainly what I would hope for.
Now, you have been doing the podcast Tales from the Rabbit Hole, which we play promotions for quite regularly on the Skeptic Zone for some years now.
Less than a year, actually. It's been about 8 or 9 months.
Really?
Rabbit Hole.
Okay, that's interesting. Because there are so many episodes, I assumed it had been going for longer.
I tried to do one a week, and I was doing pretty much one a week up until the coronavirus stuff kind of hit, and that kind of distracted me for a while. So I've only managed to get one episode out over the last month, but before that, I was doing them a lot more frequently.
Right.
And hopefully I can get back to doing that again in the future.
Yes, it's a slow, interesting conversation you have with various people who are conspiracy theorists or former conspiracy theorists, which was very interesting. And the latest episode you spend an hour chatting to a woman who is a flat earther, and the conversation drifts into what her opinion is of the current pandemic. Now, let's talk about that. Are you, in your research and you're looking around the internet, are you seeing a lot of conspiracy theories now bubble up with the pandemic?
Oh yeah, certainly. Obviously there's, you've probably seen the ones that are in the paper, like the 5G thing, like people saying that 5G radiation caused the pandemic. But there's some other kind of interesting ones that have been coming along. Like there's one about Bill Gates and quantum dot vaccines. Which is kind of this weird thing where it's kind of like ties together the mark of the beast and the New World Order.
Oh, wow.
And yet it's actually a fairly, in a way, mainstream conspiracy. It's this, someone found this science paper that someone had written where they were trying to solve a problem with vaccines in developing countries where they don't have good medical records. So they thought, like, what we'll do is when we give someone a vaccine, we'll give them an invisible ink tattoo along with the vaccine. So we'll be able to tell which vaccines they have, because different vaccines would have different marks. And of course, they think that this is the mark of the beast.
Oh, right.
And now this then ties into the coronavirus thing, because they think they're going to implant everybody with these quantum dot microchips, even though they're not really microchips, so they can track everybody for contact tracing with the virus. They think they're going to use this as an excuse to get everybody hooked up with these mark of the beast coronavirus tracking ID things. So yeah, it's I think all of the old conspiracy theories have been kind of pressured by this, by the coronavirus situation, and it's kind of like shifting some things, and it's kind of sidelining some things as well.
It's interesting because we've seen here in this country how people who are traditionally into conspiracy theories, like the anti-vaxxers, for example, have certainly come on board, and many of them are of the opinion that there's no pandemic and people aren't really going in the hospitals. I'm just wondering when we're going to see people saying that all the people in New York are actors. They're just lined up, paid actors to dress in surgical gowns or pretend to be dead or something like that.
Yeah, there's certainly a degree of that already. There's a kind of a Twitter movement which was hashtag Film Your Hospital, where they were encouraging people to go and to the hospitals that they're showing on the news and try to see if what they showed on the news is what's actually happening. So they would go to a hospital, and then they would they'd go there in a time that there wasn't that many people standing outside it, and then they would claim that the news reports were fake. So yeah, there's definitely like an immediate conspiracy theory along those lines. Now you think like the idea of everybody being actors is this extreme conspiracy theory, but this type of thing is actually fairly mainstream now. Just that all they're saying is that the media is dramatizing things a bit too much, and so there's kind of there's spectrums of intensity of all conspiracy theories, and I think the coronavirus theories like this the theories are going to span the entire spectrum. You can have fairly innocuous things like the media is hyping things up, all the way up to it's an entirely fake thing with everybody's an actor.
Well, it's for the conspiracy theorists, it's a dream come true. It really is. I mean, it incorporates so much. And you're saying that there's this movement of or people encouraging other people to go into hospitals and take photographs and film. That happened here in Australia with a noted conspiracy theorist by the name of Meryl Dorey, putting out publicly that she thought people should go in and snap pictures in hospitals to make sure that this was really happening. But as I say, it is a dream come true for a lot of conspiracy theorists. Now, one of the other matters I want to talk to you about is some years ago in Sydney, popped up these posters, and I'm just moving across here. I've actually scored one. I actually got one a couple of years ago, and I framed it, and then they disappeared. It's called Weather Modification, the poster. It's a very dramatic poster, and I'll explain it in a minute. And I scored one, and then they all just vanished. But in the last 2 weeks or the last week, on my rounds of doing my exercise here in Sydney and my regular walks, I've come across multitudes of them twice as big. Now, the one I have is, it's roughly a meter, maybe a meter and a little bit tall. In fact, what I'll do now is I'll play a little clip of me walking along describing them. Well, I'm walking along near a train station here in Sydney, sort of a side street. And along the train line, which is sort of built up, there's lots of room for posters advertising all sorts of things. And somebody has come along, probably in the dead of the night, I don't know, and slapped up lots of these posters which say, they're bright posters, bright yellow and red, black writing. There's a huge jet plane with sort of contrails coming out. Weather modification, it says. Droughts, melting ice caps and glaciers, bee colony collapse, mass tree die-offs, atmospheric saturation of methane, extreme bushfires, reduced vitamin D production, sabotage of food supply, respiratory illness epidemic, how about that, epidemic neurological disorders, increased UV and skin cancer, complete global omnicide. Join the fight. Help end this crime. geoengineeringwatch.org. And if I walk along here beside this wall and these posters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm guessing there are about 30, possibly 30 of these posters. They're well over a meter tall. It's quite an undertaking, and I imagine they won't be here for long. That was me exploring these posters, Mick, and of course the website mentioned, and it appears to be run by somebody that you've had dealings with, I'm sure, Dane Wigington.
Dane Wigington is actually someone I've had dealings with, I guess, for quite a long time. I actually went to a chemtrails conference.
Wow.
I can't remember when it was now. It must have been about 10 years ago or so. And he was there. He was one of the speakers at this conference. And he's one of the guys who's really organizing this whole chemtrail movement, which he likes to call a geoengineering movement, because his theory is that the chemtrails, the lines in the sky, which are actually contrails, are some kind of secret geoengineering project, which, this poster calls it weather modification, which actually isn't geoengineering at all.
Right.
Weather modification is a completely different thing. Weather modification is just cloud seeding. And I think the reason they've cropped up again, if you look at the list of things, these are all the old things that they predicted back in around about the year 2000, 1999, when this whole thing first started. There were all these things that they said that were going to happen because of the chemtrails. And two of them, the respiratory illness epidemic and the shortage of food supply, are two things that have kind of come true. So I think they've kind of leapt on the bandwagon of the coronavirus pandemic, and they said, look, we were right. The chemtrails are causing this respiratory illness epidemic, and the reason you can't find toilet paper or bread is that because of the chemtrails.
Yes.
But really, obviously, they're trying to draw a link between the coronavirus and the chemtrails, and they've got the skull and crossbones on there as well, which kind of symbolizes some kind of illness type thing. But I guess they had that on before the coronavirus. But yeah, these are old claims that have been around for a while,
and it's interesting too, and it makes sort of sense what you just said, why these could be coming back now. But I also have to wonder that this is not a cheap exercise. I mean, to print hundreds of posters at this size, full color posters, and then have somebody running around Sydney putting them up, hundreds of them. Somebody is very dedicated, I think.
Yeah, and Dane Wigington, he's in California, quite close to me actually. But so obviously it's not him doing it. But he is a guy who he made a bunch of money in real estate and building houses, and he kind of retired to Northern California, and he bought a big big, like 200-acre property up there. And after he moved up there, he started seeing contrails, because where he lived before, there weren't that many planes going overhead. The weather was a bit different. And he moved to California right under a flight path, and he saw these contrails, and he became convinced. So you got this guy who's kind of, he's fairly well off, he's retired, and he's convinced that chemtrails are real. So he spends quite a bit of his own money in promoting this type of thing. He will fund things like billboards by the side of the road. Those big advertising billboards. There's actually a few of those, and he funds things like this. And it's probably someone similarly well off. Not particularly well off, but just someone who's retired, who has like a little bit of money, who can who's really convinced that chemtrails are real.
Yeah.
And so he's thinking he's doing the right thing. So he's spending like a chunk of his money, just like some people will spend a chunk of their money doing a hobby. This is his hobby, except he thinks that he's trying to save the world.
Yes, yeah. And it's also interesting from a legal point of view. I mean, now I don't know exactly of what I speak, but I strongly suspect somebody's come in the middle of the night with a big roll of these posters and some glue and a brush, and because they're placed over other advertising posters, and these other posters have been paid for. This is a business. Yeah. People put up advertising around cities, and somebody's just taken it upon themselves to say, well, here's a nice stretch of real estate along this road. I don't care what the posters are there. I'll slap up mine instead. And that, if that's the case, that's typical of a zealot, I would think.
Yeah, and you see that sometimes with graffiti. Like there's one guy in particular in the UK who was going around spraying "Look Up." Actually, it was his website was lookup.co.uk or something like that. But he was spraying it everywhere, and it was on like cash machines, and it was on shop windows, and it was in the subway, and he was doing this for a long time. And I think eventually he probably got into some trouble with the law for doing this, because he figured out who was doing it. But yeah. But this thing here, the posting over other people's posters, which it's kind of a long-standing thing that people do as a cheap way of putting posters up, called fly posting, I think.
Right. Yeah.
And they usually just will stay up there for a while, and the real posters will, the people who actually own the space will take them down. Yeah. But it can be quite effective, because you stick it up in the subway, a lot of people see it. But yeah, it's pretty interesting, this list of things. I noticed one of the other things is the extreme brush fires, which obviously you've had
How about that?
Huge problem with.
Yes.
In Australia. So another thing that's they can point the finger at and say this came true.
It's all coming true.
Waiting for of course, bee colony, like that happened. The bee colony collapse happened, but then they kind of bounced back. Melting ice caps, that's been happening the whole time. Yeah, mass tree die-offs isn't really happening that much. There's been like a few specific ones with beetles and things like that. But they must have been really glad when they managed to tick a few of the boxes.
Yes, maybe so. Now, it's interesting you should talk about the polar caps melting, and it just sort of brings me back to what we were discussing before and your podcast with the Flat Earthers. And I did listen to the latest one, which I found fascinating. And as I was listening, and you and your guest were describing the Flat Earth, it occurred to me that their model, or many of them, suppose that the North Pole is in the center of a disk, and the South Pole is either a wall of ice around the rim or unknown. And I thought, well, why isn't it the other way around? Why are they so North Pole centric? Why isn't the South Pole in the center of the disk and the North Pole on the rim?
Well, it's just because Australia is a bit of a backwater. It's because the modern flat Earth movement started in the late 1800s in England. Yeah. And the guy who did it was basing all of his thoughts on what he knew, what he could see around him, which was like the Northern Hemisphere. He didn't really think very much about Australia or about South America or South Africa. So, like a lot of things, it's Northern Hemisphere centric.
It really is.
Because that's kind of the default thing. You could have thought that it would work exactly as well with the Southern Hemisphere being in the center of the disk, which, of course, is a huge problem for the actual flat Earth theory. Like, it wouldn't actually work just as well if it was actually a disk. So
Well, one of the most hilarious arguments I've heard from them is they'll say, if the Earth was a ball, how come the water doesn't fall off the south?
yeah, it's so hard to tell when people say things like that whether they are joking.
Well, yes, it is, isn't it? I mean, it's a parody of itself.
Yeah, some of them are joking, and some of them are not joking. Yeah. It's hard to know which one it is when you're talking to them.
Now, folks, you can hear all about many conspiracy theories, flat Earth, and lots of other things at the podcast. The podcast, which is called Tales from the Rabbit Hole. How can people tune into that, Mick?
It's everywhere you can find podcasts, or tftrh.com.
Yep, that's the easiest thing to do. And also, I have in my possession here something you sent to me a little while ago, and it's a proof copy, in fact, of your book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect. And I imagine that book is still out there to be bought.
It is, yes, and it's selling reasonably well, I think, now as much as it was back then. And I think, because of the revived interest in conspiracy theories, in a way, it's actually given me a tiny boost in sales.
That's good to know. Well, folks, I'll link to where you can buy a copy for yourself in this week's show notes, and I'll certainly link to your podcast, Mick. And I'm sure we'll probably speak in the not too distant future as this sort of thing, this current situation drags on a little bit, and who knows what the next conspiracy will be. Something about the Hollow Earth, maybe.
Yes, indeed. There's always something, and now is the time for people to sit at home and think about conspiracy theories.
Well, can't do much else. But for now, Mick West over there in California, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Mick West. In my podcast, Tales from the Rabbit Hole, I have extended conversations with people who have been involved in conspiracy culture. I do this for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because it's really interesting. These people have great stories about how they fell down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole, what they did down there, and what it was that helped them out. Sometimes I also talk to people who investigate conspiracy theories, and they have equally fascinating stories from the other side. Secondly, I want to understand how best to prevent the spread of conspiracy theories and misinformation, which is an increasing problem in a time when alternative media is exploding. The best way to do this is to communicate effectively with the people involved, and the best way to do that is with a nice long chat. So check it out, Tales from the Rabbit Hole, tftrh.com.
That looks good enough to eat. Or does it? Here's the diet skeptic, Mandy Lee Noble.
Hello, Skeptic Zone listeners. Mandy Lee Noble here, dietitian and skeptic, reporting from Brisbane. Well, welcome everyone to the Diet Skeptic Report, and welcome to Unprecedented Times. This is my first ISO Skeptic Report, completed around the activities of a full house of humans working and learning from home. The COVID-19 pandemic has for many of us brought significant changes to our lives, and even how we think and what we value. And you may be thinking that in a post-COVID world, where frontline health professionals and scientists are being recognised as the heroes that they are, that the place for pseudoscience in health has significantly diminished. Unfortunately, that is not the case. The reason for this is that health concern provides opportunities for so-called alternative health providers. And this has definitely been the case with COVID-19, where we've already seen dodgy devices, useless supplements, and non-evidence-based wellness programs being touted as protective against COVID-19. So this week on the Diet Skeptic Report, I am discussing why, for wellness gurus, the COVID-19 pandemic is good for business. First, to some good news. Australian listeners, you may already be aware that on Friday, our own infamous wellness guru, Pete Evans, copped a $25,000 fine from the Australian Therapeutics Good Administration after I tweeted a video of him claiming a device called a biocharger, which is nothing more than a plasma lamp with flashing lights, could have some action on COVID-19. Here is Richard reading the TGA statement.
From the Australian Government, the Therapeutics Goods Administration, at www.tga.gov.au. Media and press release statement issued on the 24th of April 2020. Pete Evans' company fined for alleged COVID-19 advertising breaches. The Therapeutic Goods Administration, TGA, has issued 2 infringement notices to Peter Evans Chef Proprietary Limited, the company, totaling $25,200 for alleged breaches of the Therapeutics Goods Act 1989, the Act. Mr. Evans is the sole director/secretary of the company. The TGA received a number of complaints about the promotion of a biocharger device that occurred during a Facebook live stream on the 9th of April 2020. Mr. Evans allegedly live streamed on his Facebook page, which has more than 1.4 million followers, claims that the device could be used in relation to, quote, Wuhan coronavirus, end quote, a claim which has no apparent foundation and which the TGA takes extremely seriously. Any claim that references COVID-19 is a restricted representation under the Therapeutics Goods legislation and is of significant concern to the TGA given the heightened public concern about the pandemic. The TGA recently published a warning to advertisers and consumers about illegal advertising relating to COVID-19. The TGA has issued the company with an infringement notice in respect to the representation made in the live stream/video. The second infringement notice was issued for alleged advertising breaches on the website www.peteevans.com, which is maintained by the company. The page for the biocharger included such claims as proven to restore strength, stamina, coordination, and mental clarity. Sharpen your mental clarity. Recovery from an injury stress. Accelerated muscle recovery and reduced stiffness in joints. As the biocharger device has been represented by the company as being for therapeutic uses, it is a therapeutics good within the meaning of the Act and is subject to the regulatory framework established under the Act and administered by the TGA. Unless a specific exemption applies, therapeutic goods must be entered in the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, ARTG, before they can be lawfully supplied or advertised in Australia. The TGA regulates all medicines, medical devices, and biologicals under the Act. The regulatory scheme is important to the safety of Australian consumers, and the TGA investigates suspected illegal activity related to therapeutic goods. The TGA is monitoring non-compliance, particularly in relation to the advertising of products that claim to prevent or cure COVID-19, and will continue to take action in relation to any advertisements that do not meet the requirements, including those that seek to mislead consumers. And that press release comes to us from the Therapeutics Goods Administration, published on the 24th of April, 2020.
Thanks, Richard. Unfortunately, spruiking supposedly therapeutic disco lights is not all that Pete has had to say about COVID-19. Pete has also repeated an unsubstantiated claim that nuts can be problematic for our immune system in relation to viruses, and that the government response should be focused on wellness rather than containment. In another recent Facebook Live session, Evans expressed genuine bewilderment that there was no interest from the media when he offered paleo recipes for publication to help the situation. But Peter's not the only wellness guru to take advantage of the COVID-19 pandemic to promote their products and services. It should come of no surprise to skeptic listeners that Pete Evans' mentor, Joseph McCullough, an American osteopathic physician who markets dietary supplements and medical devices, has also released 6 podcasts on COVID-19 that are targeted at increasing the concerns of his listenership by connecting the outbreak to wild conspiracy theories. McCullough then also makes claims without evidence that vitamin C, magnesium and ozone therapy may be able to prevent and treat COVID-19. Of course, all of these treatments are without evidence, but they are also all available for purchase on his website. There is also Cindy Amara, who describes herself as a nutritionist and wellness influencer, living a short distance north of me on the beautiful Sunshine Coast. Skeptics may already know of Amara for her unfounded nutrition advice and support of the anti-vax movement. Today, Cindy Amara was featured in an article in a local newspaper, the Sunshine Coast Daily, saying the chances of you fighting the coronavirus are far greater if you can be healthy, she said. It's not the virus that's the issue, it's the host. And if you're a sick human, you're not going to be able to fight the virus. Then, of course, the article in the Sunshine Coast Daily included links to Amara's website, where she sells books, supplements and weight loss programs. I could go on, and the list is certainly endless, but the bottom line is that science is yet to identify effective drugs for the prevention and treatment of COVID-19, and our best bet is to adhere to the advice of our medical authorities regarding containment within the community and seeking health care immediately should symptoms arise. While there's no doubt that the messages from Pete Evans, Joseph McCullough and Cindy Amara are dangerous and place the community at risk of higher and more rapid rates of COVID-19 infection, what I would like to invite you, the listener, to do is to take something more away from this situation, and that is a unique insight into how the peddlers of woo exploit the health concerns of the vulnerable for profit. This is the pattern of behaviour that underpins all wellness gurus. Their objective is to identify health concerns, whether they are perceived or real, and to provide services and products that claim success beyond what current evidence-based treatments can provide. The fact that these services and products show no objective benefits does not matter because they are not held to the rigours of testing. Sometimes these so-called alternative medicines may look like they achieve benefits. This is because they're provided for conditions that would have improved without treatment, or for conditions that are naturally relapsing and remitting. But more often, health consumers realise they've been scammed and they're too embarrassed or too sick to make a formal complaint. So skeptics, please feel free not to accept this blatant disregard for the most vulnerable in our community and our national effort to minimise the effect of COVID-19. If you see dodgy claims, record them and report them. The TGA's response to Pete Evans' biocharges shows our regulators are listening and they are prepared to act. Finally, to everyone listening, I would like to say 2 things. Firstly, to those who've lost so much, including the lives of loved ones during this pandemic, my heart goes out to you. Secondly, to those directly working to fight COVID-19, I'm eternally grateful. And to everyone at home caring for themselves, their loved ones and their community by following the guidelines of our authorities, even when it comes at great personal cost, I thank you. Thank you, Richard, for helping with this report, and thank you, skeptics, for listening. Bye for now.
Aliens are probing people and mutilating cows.
9/11 was an inside job.
Homeopathy cleared up my athlete's foot.
Vaccines cause autism.
Not all psychics are con artists. Mine is definitely real.
We all have friends and family who believe these things and much more. Well, if you're a rational thinker who is tired of arguing on social media and never getting anywhere, we have a solution for you.
Join the Guerrilla Skepticism and Wikipedia team, and we will teach you how to add reliable scientific and skeptical information to the world's #1 source of information, Wikipedia.
We write new articles and improve existing ones. We remove pseudoscience, paranormal, and alt-med claims, substituting the actual facts. And we operate in many languages.
We've already reached tens of millions of people searching for information, but as you can imagine, we can never do enough.
So please join us. All you need is a PC, a Facebook account, and the desire to help educate the planet. In fact, you'll be educating the world while you sleep.
Contact us at gsowteam@gmail.com.
Guerrilla Skepticism. The time is now.
Music by purpleplanet.com.
Logical fallacies. What are logical fallacies, and why is it important that critical thinkers should know about them? A logical fallacy is an error we can make in reasoning, but it usually crops up when we are discussing or arguing our point of view. Some people might even knowingly use them to try and score cheap points in an argument due to intellectual laziness. They are traps we can fall into, but if we know what to look out for, we can spot them when they occur and stop ourselves from using them. This week we'll look at the appeal to nature.
This is the false, somewhat romantic idea that just because something comes from nature, it must therefore be pure, wholesome, beneficial, and healthy. Basically, good for you.
This fallacy can often be seen in the marketing of food and certain so-called alternative medicines. It plays on our notion of life in a simpler, more innocent time that really never existed. When people lived a more natural life, their life expectancy was generally shorter and plagued with bad health along the way.
I'm going to stick to natural products only from now on and steer clear of chemicals.
Somehow over the last few decades, the idea that chemicals are artificial and therefore bad has become a widely held public opinion. You have no doubt seen the words chemical-free on everything from food supplements to shampoo. Since even water is a chemical, its formula being the famous H2O, it's a wonder that this falsehood ever caught hold. Chemicals, be they natural or artificial, are neither good nor bad in themselves. It's how they are used and in what quantity or in what compound that determines their effect.
I'm not going to risk my children getting vaccinated. It is important that they get a dose of the measles to build up their natural immunity.
One of the privileges many of us have is to live in a society with advanced medical care which led to vaccination and the near eradication of diseases like measles. Even if a child is unfortunate enough to contract measles, our health system is ready if that child becomes seriously ill. In some parts of the world where people are less fortunate, each year, thousands of children and even adults die from measles, which, after all, is a natural disease. Even COVID-19 is natural.
Many women these days are opting for natural childbirth in the comfort of their own home with family and a midwife on hand. This means that the child will start life in a peaceful and loving environment.
Newborn babies are incapable of knowing or caring where they are born and will not remember the event. While birth is indeed part of nature,
So is the alarmingly high death rate for both mother and baby, where modern medical care is not available. For most of our ancestors, going back into the distant past, a natural childbirth was a time of both great anticipation and great apprehension. Nature is neither our enemy nor our friend. It is simply the ongoing process of the universe. We can point to much in nature that is good for us, like fresh air and necessary vitamins, and much that is bad, even fatal, like many natural diseases or natural disasters such as earthquakes, fires and floods. Just keep in mind that nature is a blind, uncaring process and not some benevolent entity that has our best interests at heart. Knowing a logical fallacy when you hear one, and even knowing its name, is important when arguing your point of view. However, you may come across as arrogant and not get very far if you call it out by name to your opponent when you hear it being used. If your opponent calls you out for using one, it's time to stop and think about how you are making your case. Use your knowledge of logical fallacies wisely, and remember that even if your point of view is right and you know all the pitfalls in arguing your case, it doesn't always mean you'll win on the day. And as skeptics, we must also remember that we too can be wrong at times. I'm Michelle Bickersma from the Vic Skeptics. Thanks for listening.
You told me that aliens really exist. You met them and swooned.
Sziasztok!
Всем привет!
Hejsan hejsan!
Have you ever wondered what skeptics are up to in countries where English is not necessarily the first language?
Or are you interested to learn about some fascinating and sometimes very bizarre Europe-related facts, events, or people from history of skepticism?
Or do you just want to know who's been really wrong lately?
You can find out all about that and more on the award-winning show, The ESP,
the European Skeptics Podcast. So, where can people find the show?
You can find it online at theesp.eu, but you can also follow us on Twitter at espodcast_EU or like us on Facebook. Oh, and you can contact the show by sending an email to info@theesp.eu. If you want to subscribe, do a quick search for the European Skeptics Podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get to your podcast.
The European Skeptics Podcast.
The real ESP experience.
I don't know how you can believe.
Here is a newsletter from the Centre for Inquiry at centreforinquiry.org. It's time to stop giving snake oil salesmen the benefit of the doubt. The makers of homeopathic medicine want it both ways. They want their drugs to be treated like real medicine, to be able to claim they can treat all kinds of ailments and sell them right alongside evidence-based medicines on pharmacy shelves. They also don't want their products to be held to the same rigorous standards of safety and efficacy as real medicine. They don't want to have to prove their stuff actually works because, of course, they know it doesn't. Homeopathy is perhaps the most obvious phony form of alternative medicine, and we simply can't assume that those who manufacture and market it are acting in good faith, any more than we can assume positive intent from a fraud psychic who fleeces clients out of their life savings to remove a curse. But this is how the Food and Drug Administration policy has treated homeopathy's profiteers for years, allowing them to make all manner of outrageous claims about homeopathy's healing powers, while evading any meaningful oversight or regulation. The Centre for Inquiry is doing something about it. We have just filed our official response to the FDA's draft guidelines on homeopathic drugs, telling them they need to stop giving snake oil salesmen the benefit of the doubt and hold them accountable to the Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act like all other drug manufacturers. In the middle of a global pandemic, when people are feeling scared and vulnerable, and when misinformation floods social media, the officials charged with protecting Americans' health need to take a firmer stand against pseudoscience. Now is the time for the FDA to enforce its own rules and stop making special exceptions for what they know to be fake medicine. CFI is the leading organization taking on the deceptive marketing of homeopathic medicine. Our years of advocacy have led to stricter regulations in the marketing of homeopathic products from the Federal Trade Commission, and we are currently waging 2 major consumer protection lawsuits against Walmart and CVS over their sale and marketing of homeopathics. We are making a real difference. Like no other time before, we need a zero-tolerance approach to pseudoscience and snake oil. This is the era where science and evidence must prevail, for all our sakes. Join us in this effort and be part of the solution. And that comes to us from the Centre for Inquiry, and you can find out more by visiting centreforinquiry.org and centreforinquiry.org/coronavirus. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone, and thank you, Pontus, for being the co-host this week.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. Very interesting episode.
Now, I know you've got some news to tell us, but before you do that, I've got some interesting news. A couple of weeks ago on the show, I was telling listeners about an idea I had for an online depository of all things crazy to do with coronavirus and quackery and outrageous claims. Well, a listener to the show, a supporter of the show, has got his act together, and he's put together a site where anybody can go along and upload their crazy COVID-19 conspiracy or health claims. That site is coronaconspiracy.cloud. Coronaconspiracy, one word, .cloud. I'll link to that in the show notes. If you see something on Facebook or online, take a screen capture of it. If you're out and about in public doing your daily exercise walk, for example, and you see some sort of crazy health claim with coronavirus or a conspiracy maybe, you can take a picture, then upload it to that site together with some other information. It'll be vetted, of course, and then that will be made publicly available. So maybe people around the world can use that. I mean, we've all got common goals when it comes to this, so that's a very welcome site, and I must thank our supporter for putting that together.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. It will also be a record. I mean, if going on, like in the future, you can go back and look at it, what was really peddled during this interesting times. Yeah.
Oh, I think it'll be a great resource for people all around the world. Now, you've got some news from Sweden.
Yeah, that's right. As you've mentioned, Richard, on the Skeptic Zone here before, they have in the UK something they call Skeptics in the Pub Online, where you have meetings online instead of going to the local pub because you can't. And that's happening in other countries as well, I would like to say. And I know our friends in Portugal have done something like that. I myself have appeared in one Skeptics in the Pub Online a little more than a week ago. I gave a talk in Swedish, It's called, if you translate it, How to Know What's Fake When All Is Uncertain. So I think that's... I'd like to push that a little bit. I know most people maybe listening to this show do not speak Swedish, but if you do, then you can check it out. And I think it's a great idea, and I encourage other skeptical groups across the world to do the same.
So how can people find out?
Oh, they should go to our YouTube channel, the Swedish Skeptics YouTube channel, and the Swedish Skeptics are called VOF. That's a Swedish abbreviation. So the channel is called VOF TV, and you can find it there.
Excellent. VOF TV, a link, of course, in this week's show notes. Well, I think that just about wraps up the show for this week. Once again, thank you very much, Pontus. This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed having you as a co-host.
Me
again,
too.
folks,
Me
because it's almost like you're in the studio with me. You're up there on the monitor, and I can see you, and you can see me. And we're both speaking into our respective microphones on the other side of the planet. I mean, it's hard to find, it's hard to imagine we could be further apart.
Yes.
When you think about
it's amazing. It's amazing. It's really good technology, yeah.
Now, either I'm on my head or you're on your head, depending.
Ah, yes, but I turned my camera upside down so that you wouldn't have to suffer through that.
I'm so grateful. Thank you very much, Pontus. And thank you, everybody, for listening. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders and...
Pontus Böckman.
Signing off. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Well, no. Pontus is hijacking the end of the show, folks. Welcome to the people who listen after the music. And quite a lot of people do listen after the music. It's amazing. I get emails from people who are playing the dice game saying, I missed it by 1 this week.
Yeah, I'm always looking forward to this. So I think we should do something a little bit different this time, since I'm here and I have a possibility to mess things up. Because... I don't have a fancy dice with aliens or 20 sides or anything. It's just a normal one, just a 1 to 6-sided, well, a 6-sided die.
Yeah.
So I thought I'm going to spice it up another way. You're going to play for money, Richard, this time. So I have this normal dice, and I have 6 European Skeptic coins lined up in front of me. In an order that is predetermined, but you can't see which they are. So I've numbered the coins from 1 to 6, and you're going to bet on 1 coin, and then the dice is going to choose a coin, and we'll see if you get the right one, and then I will also flip it and see, and you will have to say if it comes up heads or tails.
Oh wow, this is interesting variation.
Yes, I hope it's not too complicated here, but I have.
Well, we can.
Let me tell you what coins I have here. I have 1 cent, 2 cent, and a 5 cent and a 50 cent coin. Yeah. So 1, 2, 5, and 50, and then I have a €1 coin and a €2 coin. Okay. So tell me, Richard, which one do you select? And of course, people at home can play along.
Okay, we have a 1 cent, 2 cent, 5 cent, 50 cent, and €1 and a €2.
Yeah.
€1. I'll choose the €1 coin.
€1. Not going for the top, but still a sizable amount of money here.
Yeah.
So let me roll the dice. Aha, that's very interesting. So I've selected, or the dice has selected 1 coin, but I'm going to keep you in suspense for a little bit. This is now Schrödinger's coin for you, Richard. So tell me, heads or tails?
Oh, okay. Heads.
Oh, and I'll do that again. This is hard to do. And it is heads.
Hooray.
It is heads. Right. Unfortunately, it's the €2 coin. It's not the €1 coin.
Oh.
So you lost this time. But maybe we'll try it again another time.
So all the people at home who imagined that you would roll for the €2 coin, you got it this week. And if you imagined that and you imagined heads afterwards, well done.
Yes. I think there should be some. The odds are not extremely high. But
so somebody will work it out and let me know.
I think so.